Welcome back to the next presentation in our series designed to help businesses making small amounts of hazardous waste comply with the New Hampshire hazardous waste rules. This presentation is for those businesses that have at least 440 pounds of non-acute hazardous waste stored at their site. If you remember, 440 pounds is roughly equal to a 55-gallon drum of liquid like water. Some wastes are a lot heavier than others though. For instance, a drum of damp rags will weigh a lot less than a drum of waste acid. You must consider your particular situation to figure out how much of your waste is equal to 440 pounds. If you checked yes in the box of line 16 in section E, you said that you have at least 440 pounds of hazardous waste being stored at your facility. Because you have a larger amount of hazardous waste at your site, you have a greater risk. If there's a fire, bad chemical reaction, or a release of hazardous waste at your business, there will be more waste involved and likely more damage as a result. So it makes sense that we should take extra precautions to prevent these accidents from happening. A standard concept in hazardous waste regulation is that the more waste you have, the more rules you have. The extra rules in your case are shown in this extended accumulation checklist. The first requirement on this checklist is to inspect your waste storage containers weekly. Again, if you have more waste, there's more risk, so we take steps to make sure that your containers are in good condition and stay in good condition. It also helps us notice any leaks, releases, or other dangerous conditions before they become a big issue. Your inspection checklist doesn't have to be anything elaborate. Make a list of items to check for, things like spills, leaks, and those items listed in section E of this form. This does not have to be documented, but if NHDES were to visit your facility and notice a missing label or open container, that would tell us that inspections probably aren't happening. The second item, number 2, asks about inspections of tanks storing hazardous waste. Although it's not always true, tanks are usually bigger and hold more waste in one place. They're more complicated too, with pipes, fittings, and valves, making it more likely that something will go wrong. Because of this, you're required to inspect tanks daily instead of weekly. The good news is very few VSQGs have tanks, but if you do, use the same ideas I mentioned in the previous slide to help you be successful in completing your inspections. Once in a while, it's hard to tell if something is a container or a tank. If you aren't sure, drop us a line and we'll help you figure it out. Next, in item 3, we ask if you have someone who is identified as the go-to person for any issues with hazardous waste. We want to make sure that managing this stuff isn't just a bunch of finger pointing where everyone thinks someone else was supposed to take care of it. Who's responsible for inspecting the storage area? Who signs the manifest when this stuff is shipped? In short, who's responsible? Often, this is the business owner, but it depends on the size of the business. Whatever the case may be, prove that you have someone with this responsibility by writing their name on line 3. Item number 4. Does the facility have a designated emergency coordinator who is either on the premises or on call with the responsibility for coordinating all emergency response measures? We use the term emergency coordinator to describe the person who is in charge of handling any emergencies such as spills, releases, or fires related to hazardous waste. This could be the same person that's responsible for other hazardous waste management at your business, the person we just identified in the previous question, but it doesn't have to be. The goal is to think about emergencies before they happen. Identify a person who will take charge and make the immediate decisions, and make sure there's someone who works at the facility or lives close by. Again, this is often the owner of the business. If your business is big enough that you can hire an emergency response company to take care of spills and fires, that's great. But you won't meet this requirement if they're located 100 miles away. Number 5 asks if you have a phone that can call emergency responders, like your local fire department. Nowadays, pretty much everyone has a cell phone, and landlines are becoming a thing of the past. If you rely on a cell phone to meet this requirement, be sure that this is in writing and that your cell phone has service. If you are ever inspected, you'll be asked by the inspector to prove that a phone works, so be sure to check regularly. Remember too that this phone is supposed to be within 100 feet of the storage area. Number 6 asks if you have some kind of building alarm to tell employees when to evacuate. In a single, small building that isn't very noisy, your voice might meet this requirement. But if you have multiple buildings, it's a big facility, or it's really noisy, some kind of device like a horn, siren, paging system, or other way to alert folks will be necessary. On to item 7. We've all had moments in our lives where we're in a panic situation and we struggle to think straight. For this reason, we require that a telephone mentioned in item number 5 has a list of numbers to call an emergency right next to it. This includes the emergency coordinator and the State of New Hampshire Emergency Response Team. For your information, the number for the State Emergency Response Team is 603-271-3899 during normal business hours. After hours, they can be reached through the State Police by dialing 603-223-4381. In addition to the phone numbers, describe or have a map of where the fire extinguishers and spill control materials are located, as well as the location of emergency fire alarms if you have them. Here's an example of what that phone posting might look like, and those 2 emergency phone numbers I just mentioned. Please note that the state police number provided here is not the same as calling 911. Here's another example of how you might show where your emergency equipment is located. This works well if you're a visual person like me. Number 8. Are your employees trained? While we said we want you to identify a single person who is ultimately responsible for managing hazardous waste, we also want every employee involved in hazardous waste handling or management to understand what they're supposed to do. While a formal training program is a great option, it's not necessary or even a workable idea for every business. But how much training is enough training? A small business with few employees should consider whether, if an inspector was on site, employees could properly describe what they are supposed to do where hazardous waste is concerned. If asked, will they know where hazardous waste should go, what is dangerous about it, and what steps they need to take to stay in compliance with their particular responsibilities? Not every employee needs to know everything, but they need to know what their role is. I'll also add that to an inspector, if there are a lot of problems with mishandling of hazardous waste at your site, it's a sign of inadequate employee training that might cause them to ask more questions. Number 9. Emergency responders, like your fire department, are there to protect you, your neighbors, and your livelihood. Give them every opportunity to do that by providing them upfront with information about what stuff you have at your site and what you do with it. Document what kind of chemicals and hazardous waste you have and where you keep them in the building. Tell them where employees tend to be located and give them a drawing of your building layout. We also suggest putting the icing on the cake by inviting them to your business for a tour. If they aren't interested, at least you did your best. Here comes the tricky part. Document that you tried to provide this information to them so that you have proof. It's such an easy thing to put off or forget. We look for documentation to know that you did your part. If you send them this information in an email, get a rev receipt and keep the email chain for your records. If you hand deliver it, get them to provide you a signed statement of receipt and return, and again, keep this documentation for your records. If you send it by regular mail, we suggest sending it certified mail and keeping the return card again for your records. Item number 10. We said that if you have 440 pounds or more of non-acute hazardous waste, you have to follow these extra rules. We also want you to know that if you have 5 times that amount, or 2,200 pounds, that you have even more rules to follow. And that means you have to get that hazardous waste shipped off-site before you reach 2,200 pounds, or you'll be held to all of the requirements for large quantity generators until you do. To be honest, there's a lot of rules for large quantity generators, and you don't want that if you can avoid it. So make it a point to ship your waste off-site before you have 2,200 pounds. Quick reminder, you don't have to include used oil for recycle or universal waste when you're figuring out how much you have stored at your facility. You've finished the extended accumulation checklist. Well done. Now it's time to go back to page 5 and sign off on the form. If you need a little extra guidance, go back to the presentation for page 5. If this form still has you confused, feel free to go back and watch any of the presentations again. Or you can give us a call at one of these numbers during normal working hours. Please leave a message if we don't connect and we'll return your call. If email is your preference, we've got you covered. You can reach us at vsqg@des.nh.gov.